Kari Lake, great meeting, it looks like, with the president. How about that lady? What a piece of work, huh?
Oh, that PBS lady. Well, we don't know where the bias is. Are you kidding me? This is, they're getting rid of Stephen Colbert late night, the comedy, because there was no comedy. They should just play her saying that, because that's the biggest laugh I've had all day, listening to her say that PBS and NPR are fair and honest. And look, I mean, if they want to do the radical left agenda, great. But the American taxpayer, the hardworking man and woman across this country paying their taxes, shouldn't have to foot the bill.
Totally. And by the way, so even if they weren't biased as they are, is there a role, maybe there is, maybe there isn't, for a federal broadcasting situation, whether it's domestic or international? Is there?
I think it's archaic. I really do. I think it's, way back when it started up, perhaps. But now we're getting information from so many different ways. Tuning into a television, 1990s style, as I say, 1990s style news is not the way that everyone's getting their information. They're getting it in bits online, on social media, and then more compelling news. And I don't think that PBS has been overly compelling in their news. I don't think that NPR has been overly compelling. If you're into it, you're into it. If I find that it puts you to sleep just hearing these people drone on. But if people do like it, they can tune into it. The question is, should taxpayers fund it? When we are looking at being in debt the way that we are, what should the American taxpayer foot the bill for? And I think that's the big question you have to answer. And President Trump has decided it's time to shrink down this bureaucracy. And I think he's right. I'm glad they've defunded all of this. And I'm working to see that we not only shrink down Voice of America to what statutorily is required, but as President Trump has pushed, he wants to see the entire agency eliminated. So I'm busy here seeing to it that that gets accomplished in Washington, D.C.
Yeah, PBS. It wasn't, as soon as when Jim Lehrer left, that's when the place totally went kaput, in my opinion. And it is very boring and dry. Can you tell us, what is it like? Your meeting with President Trump, how did that go down? And I know he's very obviously interested in media, and he's always been fascinated by you. He knows you're a real talent.
Well, he's a real talent. He's the greatest president, not only of my lifetime. I think he'll go down as the president who saved our country, the greatest president in the history of this country. And it was great to just check in with him. I mean, he's my boss. It was great to check in with him today. We had a great conversation. You saw there in the picture that the great Vice President J.D. Vance was there as well for the meeting. And then leader John Thune walked in. And it was great to see him as well. What a great surprise. I think three of the most powerful people in the world were in that meeting, and it was great to be there. We talked about a wide range of topics, including what's happening in the news, what's been covered in the news, from everything from, what Tulsi Gabbard has been able to declassify and put out in the most transparent administration we've ever seen, to just everything that we're hearing about in the news. And we talked about our agency as well. I was talking about some of the corruption we've uncovered. I mean, just last week on Thursday, a VOA employee was arrested, and the indictment says that this employee made threatening death threats over the phone lines, calling out from the Voice of America studios, threatening Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene and members of her staff and their families. And that was going on for 15 months. That's how emboldened people feel at some of these outlets, because they've been getting away with things for so long. They think they can actually commit crimes like that.
It's pretty wild. Gosh, mess with their jobs, and yikes. Join the club, media. It's not exactly, secure work. It's not the civil service. Hey, can I just show you something? Right. I want to ask you overall. I call this the monster pick. It's a reading program in New York, a drag queen in a public school with a child, and a prominent person in New York complained about this, and the officials, the education officials, accused the parent of committing a hate crime. It was so wild. I think it kind of fascinates me, the moment, how crazy everything was. On a scale of 1 to 10, how much are we on the way back to normalcy? Are we winning? I know the left is kind of freaking out, but when will this be viewed as the depravity that it is?
I think it already is. I really think we've turned a corner on all of the woke garbage. How that whole phase ever started up where they were pushing drag queens in our schools with our little ones and drag queens in our churches. I mean, however that started, I don't know. But now we're starting to look at it, and it's almost like people are recoiling, saying, how did we get ensnared in that insanity and as you said, depravity? Because to put little ones through that is just ridiculous. I think we're turning the corner. I think woke is over. President Trump has secured this country and I think saved this country from who knows what kind of a tipping point we were at. It did not look good. And I just saw tonight the interview with Hunter Biden. I don't know if he's using again or what's going on. It was an unhinged interview, and I thought, thank you God, that we were saved and spared from that craziness and that lack of leadership, and we were spared from Kamala Harris and what that road they were pushing us down, which was not only depraved, but it was anti-American and just plain dangerous with the wide open border and an economy that was in a tailspin.
Yeah, that Hunter Biden interview, we'll have a shot or two a little bit later on. My dad, it's everybody's fault, but his dad, he's just a little bit manic there. I hope he's not using, but he might be. Kari Lake, thank you so much. U.S. Agency for Global Media and Kari Lake, to be continued. Thank you so much.
Thanks.